Good morning. Okay, we're going to start with chapter 18 since we've already read 16 and 17. At the end of chapter 18, you notice that the men were pretty rowdy at Mrs. Turner's cafe. And they pretty much ran her out of town because of the whole idea of colorism. I read a lot of your responses on colorism, and you all did a pretty good job of displaying your understanding of what colorism is and how it affected their community at that particular time. Okay, I want to. Well, we'll do that. We'll come back to that later. I'm going to go through and read chapter 18. Chapter 18 is not that long. I think chapter 19 is pretty much the longest chapter. But we'll talk about chapter 18 at the end of this video so that it'll help prepare you for the questions you have to answer, okay? All right, here we go. Since Tea Cake and Janie had friended with the Bahamian workers in the glades, they, the Saws, had been gradually drawn into the American crowd. They quit hiding out to hold their dances when they found that their American friends didn't laugh at them as they feared. Many of the Americans learned to jump and liked it as much as the Saws, so they began to hold dances night after night in the quarters, usually behind Tea Cake's house. Often now, Tea Cake and Janie stayed up so late at the fire dances that Tea Cake would not let her go with him to the field. He wanted her to get her rest. So she was home by herself one afternoon when she saw a band of Seminoles passing by. The men walking in front and the laden, stolid women following them like burros. She had seen Indians several times in the glades in twos or threes, but this was a large party. They were headed towards the Palm Beach Road and kept moving steadily. About an hour later, another party appeared and went the same way. Then another, just before sundown. This time, she asked where they were all going, and at last, one of the men answered her. Going to high ground, saw grass bloom, hurricane coming. Everybody was talking about it that night, but nobody was worried. The fire dance kept up till early dawn. The next day, more Indians moved east, unhurried but steady. Still, a blue sky and fair weather, beans running fine and prices good, so the Indians must be wrong. You couldn't have a hurricane when you're making $7 and $8 a day picking beans. Indians are dumb anyhow, always were. Another night of stew beef making dynamic subtleties with his drum and living, sculptural, grotesque in the dance. Next day, no Indians passed at all. It was hot and sultry, and Janie left the field and went home. Morning came without motion. The winds, to the tiniest, lisping baby breath, had left the earth. Even before the sun gave light, dead day was creeping from bush to bush, watching man. Some rabbits scurried through the quarters going east. Some possums slunk by, and their route was definite. One or two at a time, then more. By the time the people left the fields, the procession was constant. Snakes, rattlesnakes began to cross the quarters. The men killed a few, but they could not be missed from the crawling horde. People stayed indoors until daylight. Several times during the night, Janie heard sort of big animals like deer. Once the muted voice of a panther going east and east. That night, the palm and banana trees began the long-distance talk with rain. Several people took fright and picked up and went into Palm Beach anyway. 1,000 buzzards hailed a flying meat and then went above the clouds and stayed. One of the Bahamian boys stopped by Tea Cake's house in a car and hollered. Tea Cake came out, throwing laughter over his shoulder into the house. Hello, Tea Cake. Hello, Lige. Y'all, you leaving, I see? Yeah, man. You and Janie want to go? I wouldn't give nobody else a chance to a seat until I found out if you all had any way to go. Thank you ever so much, Lige, but we about decided to stay. The crow gone up, man. There ain't nothing. You ain't seen the boss man go up, is you? Well, all right now. Man, the money is too good on the muck. It's liable to fare off by tomorrow. I wouldn't leave if I was you. My uncle come for me. He say hurricane warning out in Palm Beach. Not so bad there, but man, this muck is too low and that big lake is liable to bust. Oh, no, man. Some boys in there with now talking about, some of them been in the glades for years. It ain't nothing but a little blow. You will see the whole day tomorrow trying to get back out here. The Indians gone east, man. It's dangerous. They don't always know. Indians don't know how much or nothing, to tell the truth. Else they'd own this country still. The white folks ain't gone nowhere. They ought to know if it's dangerous. You better stay here, man. Big jumping dance tonight, right here. When it fare off. Elias hesitated and started to climb out, but his uncle wouldn't let him. This time tomorrow, you're gonna wish you followed Crow. He snorted and drove off. Elias waved back to them gaily. If I never see you no more on earth, I'll meet you in Africa. Others hurried east, like the Indians and rabbits and snakes and coons. But the majority sat around laughing and waiting for the sun to get friendly again. Several men collected at TEWWG's house and sat around stuffing courage into each other's ears. Janie baked a big pan of beans and something she called sweet biscuits, and they all managed to be happy enough. Most of the great flamethrowers were there naturally, handling Big John the Conqueror and his words. How he had done everything big on earth, then went up to heaven without dying at all. Went up there picking a guitar and got all the angels doing the ring shout round and round the throne. Then everybody but God and old Peter flew off on a flying race to Jericho and back, and John the Conqueror won the race. Went on down to hell, beat the old devil, and passed out ice water to everybody down there. Somebody tried to say it was a mouth organ harp that John was playing, but the rest of them would not hear that. Don't care how good anybody could play a harp. God would rather to hear a guitar. That brought them back to TK. How come he couldn't hit that box of liquor too? Well, all right now, make us know it. When it got good to everybody, Mug Boy woke up and began to chant with the rhythm, and everybody bore down on the last word of the line. Your mama don't wear no drawers. I seen her when she took 'em off. She soaked 'em in alcohol. She sold 'em to Santa Claus. He told her 'twas against the law to wear them dirty drawers. Then Mug Boy went crazy through the feet and danced himself and everybody else crazy. When he finished, he sat back down on the floor and went to sleep again. Then they got to playing Florida Flip and Coon Can. Then it was dice, not for money. This was a show-off game. Everybody posing his fancy shots. As always, it boiled down to tea cake and motorboat. Tea cake with his shy grin and motorboat with his face like a little black cherubim just from a church tower doing amazing things with anybody's dice. The others forgot the work and the weather watching them throw. It was art. $1,000 a throw in Madison Square Garden wouldn't have gotten any more breathless suspense. It would have just been more people holding in. After a while, somebody looked out and said, "It ain't getting no fairer out there. Believe I'll get on over to my shack." Motorboat and tea cake were still playing, so everybody left them at it. Sometime that night, the winds came back. Everything in the world had a strong rattle, sharp and short, like Stubby vibrating the drum head near the edge with his fingers. By morning, Gabriel was playing the deep tones in the center of the drum. So when Janie looked out of her door, she saw the drifting mist gathered in the west. That cloud field of the sky to arm themselves with thunder and march forth against the world, louder and higher and lower and wider. The sound and motion spread, mounting, sinking, darkening. It woke up old Okeechobee, and the monster began to roll in his bed, began to roll and complain like a peevish world on a grumble. The folks in the quarters and the people in the big houses further around the shore heard the big lake and wondered. The people felt uncomfortable, but safe, because there were the seawalls to change the senseless monster in his bed. The folks let the people do the thinking. If the castles thought themselves secure, the cabins needn't worry. Their decision was already made, as always. Cheek up your cracks, shiver in your wet beds, and wait on the mercy of the Lord. The boss man might have the thing stopped before morning anyhow. It was so easy to be hopeful in the daytime when you can see the things you wish on. But it was night. It stayed night. Night was striding across nothingness with the whole round world in his hands. A big burst of thunder and lightning trampled over the roof of the house. So Tea-Cake and Motor stopped playing. Motor looked up in his angel-looking way and said, "Big Massa, draw them chairs upstairs." "I'm glad y'all stopped that crap shooting, even if it wasn't for money," Janie said. "Old Massa is doing his work now. Us ought to keep quiet." They huddled closer and stared at the door. They just didn't use another part of their bodies, and they didn't look at anything but the door. The time was past for asking the white folks what to look for through that door. 6 eyes were questioning God. Through the screaming wind, they heard things crashing and things hurtling and dashing with unbelievable velocity. A baby rabbit, terror-ridden, squirmed through a hole in the floor and squatted off there in the shadows against the wall, seeming to know that nobody wanted its flesh at such a time. And the lake got madder and madder, with only its dikes between them and him. In a little wind lull, Tea-Cake touched Janie and said, "I reckon you wish now you'd have stayed up in your big house, away from such as this, don't you?" "No, no, yeah, no. People don't die till they time come nohow. Don't care where you at. I'm with my husband in a storm. That's all." "Thank you, ma'am. But supposing you was to die now, you wouldn't get mad at me for dragging you here." "No, we've been together around 2 years. If you can see the light at daybreak, you don't care if you die at dusk. It's so many people never see the light at all. I was fumbling around and God opened the door." He dropped to the floor and put his head in her lap. "Well then, Janie, you meant what you didn't say, 'cause I never knowed you was so satisfied with me like that. I kinda thought—" The wind came back with a triple fury and put out the light for the last time. They sat in the company with the others in the other shanties, their eyes straining against crude walls and their souls asking if he meant to measure their puny might against his. They seemed to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God. As soon as Tea-Cake went out pushing wind in front of him, he saw that the wind and water had given life to lots of things that folks think of as dead, and given death to so much that had been living things. Water everywhere. Stray fish swimming in the yard. 3 inches more and the water would be in the house. Already in some. He decided to try to find a car to take them out of the glades before worse things happened. He turned back to tell Janie about it so she could be ready to go. "Get our insurance papers together, Janie. I'll tote my box myself and things like that. You got all the money out the dresser drawer already?" "Nah, get it quick and cut up a piece of the tablecloth to wrap it in. Us liable to get wet to our necks. Cut a piece of that oilcloth quick for our papers. We got to go, if it ain't too late. The dish can bear it out no longer." He snatched the oilcloth off the table and took out his knife. Janie held it straight while he slashed off a strip. "But Tea-Cake, it's too awful out there. Maybe it's better to stay in the wet than it is to try to—" He stunned the argument with half a word. "Fix," he said, and fought his way outside. He had seen more than Janie had. Janie took a big needle and ran up a longish sack, found some newspaper and wrapped up the paper money and papers and thrust them in and wiped over the end with her needle. Before she could get it thoroughly hidden in the pocket of her overalls, Tea-Cake burst in again. "'Tain't no cars, Janie." "I thought not. What we gonna do now?" "We got to walk." "In all this weather, Tea-Cake? I don't believe I can make it out of the quarters." "Oh yeah, you can. Me and you and Motorboat can all lock arms and hold one another down, eh, Motor?" "He sleep on the bed in yonder," Janie said. TK called without moving. Motorboat, you better get up there. Hell done broke loose in Georgia this minute. How can you sleep at a time like this? Water knee deep in the yard. They stepped out in water almost to their buttocks and managed to turn east. TK had to throw his box away, and Janie saw how it hurt him. Dodging flying missiles, floating daggers, avoiding stepping in holes, and warmed on the wind now at their backs until they gained comparatively dry land. They had to fight to keep from being pushed the wrong way and to hold together. They saw other people like themselves struggling along. A house down here and there, frightened cattle, but above all the drive of the wind and the water and the lake. Under its multiplied roar could be heard a mighty sound of grounding rock and timber, a wail. They looked back, saw people trying to run in raging waters and screaming when they found they couldn't. A huge barrier of the makings of the dike to which the cabins had been added was rolling and tumbling forward. 10 feet higher and as far as they could see, the muttering wall advanced before the braced-up waters like a road crusher on a cosmic scale. The monstrous beast had left his bed. The 200 miles an hour wind had loosed his chains. He seized hold of his dikes and ran forward until he met the quarters, uprooted them like grass, and rushed on after his supposed to be conquerors, rolling the dikes, rolling the houses, rolling the people in the houses, along with other timbers. The sea was walking the earth with a heavy heel. The lake is coming, TK gasped. The lake! In amazed horror from Motorboat. The lake! It's coming behind us. Janie shuddered. Us can't fly, but we can still run, TK shouted, and they ran. The gushing water ran faster. The great body was held back, but rivers spouted through fissures in the rolling wall and broke like day. The three fugitives ran past another line of shanties that topped a slight rise and gained a little. They cried out as best they could, "The lake is coming!" And barred doors flew open and others joined them in flight, crying the same as they went, "The lake is coming!" And the pursuing waters growled and shouted ahead, "Yes, I'm coming!" And those who could fled on. They made it to a tall house on a hump of ground, and Janie said, "Let's stop here. I can't make it no further. I'm done give out." "All of us is done give out," TK corrected. "We's going inside out of this weather, kill or cure." He knocked with the handle of his knife while they leaned their faces and shoulders against the wall. He knocked once more. Then he and Motorboat went around to the back and forced the door. Nobody there. "These people had more sense than I did," TK said as they dropped to the floor and lay there panting. "Us oughta went on with Lias like he asked me." "You didn't know," Janie contended. "And when you don't know, you just don't know. The storms might not have come sure enough." They went to sleep promptly, but Janie woke up first. She heard the sound of rushing water and sat up. "TK, Motorboat, the lake is coming." The lake was coming on, slower and wider, but coming. It had trampled on most of its supporting wall and lowered its front by spreading, but it came muttering and grumbling onward like a tired mammoth just the same. "This is a high, tall house. Maybe it won't reach here at all," Janie counseled. "And if it do, maybe it won't reach to the upstairs part." "Janie, Lake Okeechobee is 40 miles wide and 60 miles long. That's a whole heap of water. If this wind is shoving that whole lake this way, this house ain't nothing to swallow. Us better go. Motorboat!" "What you want, man? The lake is coming." "Oh, no, it ain't." "Yes, it is so coming. Listen, you can hear it way off. It can just come on. I'll wait right here." "Oh, get up, Motorboat. Let's make it to the Palm Beach Road. That's on a field. We's pretty safe there." "I'm safe here, man. Go ahead if you wants to. I'm sleeping." "What you gonna do if that lake reach here?" "Go upstairs. Supposing it come up there. Swim, man, that's all." "Well, goodbye, Motorboat. Everything is pretty bad, you know. Us might get missed of one another. You show is a grand friend for a man to have. Goodbye, TK. Y'all ought to stay here and sleep, man. No use in going off and leaving me like this. You don't want to. Come on with us. It might be nighttime when the water hem you up in here. That's how come I won't stay. Come on, man. TK and Janie were some distance from the house before they struck serious water. Then they had to swim in distance, and Janie could not hold up more than a few strokes at a time. So TK bore her up till finally they hit a ridge that led on towards the field. It seemed to him the wind was weakening a little, so he kept looking for a place to rest and catch his breath. His wind was gone. Janie was tired and limping, but she had not had to do that hard swimming in the turbulent waters, so TK was much worse off. But they couldn't stop. Gaining the field was something, but it was no guarantee. The lake was coming. They had to reach the 6-mile bridge. It was high and safe. Perhaps. Everybody was walking the field, hurrying, dragging, falling, crying, calling out names hopefully and hopelessly. Wind and rain beating on old folks and beating on babies. TK stumbled once or twice in his weariness, and Janie held him up. So they reached the bridge at 6-Mile Bend and thought to rest. But it was crowded. White people had preempted that point of elevation, and there was no more room. They could climb up one of its high sides and down the other. That was all. Miles further on, still no rest. They passed a dead man in a sitting position on a hummock, entirely surrounded by wild animals and snakes. Common danger made common friends. Nothing sought a conquest over the other. Another man clung to a cypress tree on a tiled island. A tin roof of a building hung from the branches by electric wires, and the wind swung it back and forth like a mighty axe. The man dared not move a step to his right, lest this crushing blade split him open. He dared not step left, for a large rattlesnake was stretched full length with his head in the wind. There was a strip of water between the island and the field, and the man clung to the tree and cried for help. "The snake won't bite you," TK yelled to him. He's scared to go into a coil, scared he'll be blowed away. Step around that side and swim off. Soon after that, TK felt he couldn't walk anymore, not right away, so he stretched alongside of the road to rest. Janie spread herself between him and the wind, and he closed his eyes and let the tiredness seep out of his limbs. On each side of the field was a great expanse of water like lakes, water full of things living and dead, things that don't belong in water. As far as the eye could reach, water and wind playing upon it in fury. A large piece of tar paper roofing sailed through the air and scudded along the field until it hung against a tree. Janie saw it with joy. That was the very thing to cover tea-cake with. She could lean against it and hold it down. The wind wasn't quite so bad as it was anyway. The very thing. Poor tea-cake. She crept on hands and knees to the piece of roofing and caught hold of it by either side. Immediately, the wind lifted both of them, and she saw herself sailing off the field to the right, out and out over the lashing water. She screamed terribly and released the roofing, which sailed away as she plunged downward in the water. TK! He heard her and sprung up. Janie was trying to swim, but fighting water too hard. He saw a cow swimming slowly towards the field in an oblique line. A massive built dog was sitting on her shoulders and shivering and growling. The cow was approaching Janie. A few strokes would bring her there. Make it to the cow and grab hold of her tail. Don't use your feet. Just your hands is enough. That's right. Come on. Janie achieved the tail of the cow and lifted her head up along the cow's rump and as far as she could above water. The cow sunk a little with the added load and thrashed a moment in terror. Thought she was being pulled down by a gator. Then she continued on. The dog stood up and growled like a lion, stiff standing hackles, stiff muscles, teeth uncovered as he lashed up his fury for the charge. TK split the water like an otter, opening his knife as he died. The dog raced down the backbone of the cow to the attack, and Janie screamed and slipped far back on the tail of the cow, just out of reach of the dog's angry jaws. He wanted to plunge in after her, but he dreaded the water somehow. TK rose out of the water at the cow's rump and seized the dog by the neck. But he was a powerful dog, and TK was overtired, so he didn't kill the dog with one stroke as he had intended. But the dog couldn't free himself either. They fought, and somehow he managed to bite TK high up on his cheekbone once. Then TK finished him and sent him to the bottom to stay there. The cow, relieved of a great weight, was landing on the field with Janie before TK stroked in and crawled weakly upon the field again. Janie began to fuss around his face where the dog had bitten him, but he said it didn't amount to anything. He'd have raised hell, though, if he had grabbed me an inch higher and bit me in my eye. You can't buy eyes in the store, you know. He flopped to the edge of the field as if the storm wasn't going on at all. Let me rest a while. Then us got to make it into town somehow. It was the next day by the sun and the clock when they reached Palm Beach. It was years later by their bodies. Winters and winters of hardship and suffering. The wheel kept turning round and round. Hope, hopelessness, and despair. But the storm blew itself out as they approached the city of refuge. Havoc was there with her mouth wide open. Back in the Everglades, the wind had romped among lakes and trees. In the city, it had raged among houses and men. TK and Janie stood on the edge of things and looked over the desolation. How can I find a doctor for your face and all this mess? Janie wailed. I ain't got the damn doctor to study about. Us needs a place to rest. A great deal of their money and perseverance, and they found a place to sleep. It was just that. No place to live at all. Just sleep. TK looked all around and sat heavily on the side of the bed. Well, he said humbly, reckon you never expected to come to this when you took up with me, did you? Once upon a time, I never expected nothing, TK, but being dead from the standing still and trying to laugh. But you come along and made something out of me. So I'm thankful for anything we come through together. Thank you, ma'am. You was twice noble to save me from that dog. TK, I don't expect you seen his eyes like I did. He didn't aim to just bite me, TK. He aimed to kill me stone dead. I'm never to forget them eyes. He wasn't nothing all over but pure hate. Wonder where he come from. Yeah, I did see him too. It was frightening. I didn't mean to take his hate neither. He had to die of me one. My switchblade said it was him. Po me. He tore me to pieces if it wasn't for you, honey. You don't have to say if it wasn't for me, baby, because I'm here. And then I want you to know it's a man here. All right. Okay, that's the end of chapter 18. That was a long chapter. Chapter 18 is important in several ways because it, for one thing, it tells you what the title of the story has to do with everything. I wanted to read that chapter to you as well because we live in Houston, Texas, and so hurricanes are something that are very common. And in 2017, during Hurricane Harvey, the same sort of desolation and same sort of fright and same sort of hopelessness was experienced by a lot of us. If you had that experience as I did with Hurricane Harvey in 2017, then when reading chapter 18, you can sort of empathize and you can get a clear picture of the mayhem in your head because it's something that you are very familiar with, like wading through water and trying to miss things that are in the water, especially if the water is really rushing and it comes up to your waist and things like that. So I thought that being from Houston, Texas, and being somewhat familiar with hurricanes and the type of havoc that they cause, that this chapter would be more relevant to you. The questions that I'm going to put up are probably going to deal with the imagery that's used in this chapter. She uses a lot of imagery because she's being very descriptive about nature. This is one of those chapters that focuses a lot on nature. And you see how she personifies nature and how she speaks of God. And they call him Massa, right? And she talks about the lake, Big Okeechobee, and how the lake is doing its work. And the wind is personified. The lake is personified. God, even though we look at him as a person, he's also sort of personified. And so there's this anthropomorphization that's going on where she's giving these things in nature human characteristics. So your questions for chapter 18 will probably center around that. And then I also want you to look at the relationship between Tea Cake and Janie, how they're able to console each other. And during this time that's really stressful, you notice that they don't blame each other. They don't go, oh, look, you're the reason that I'm here. She tries to console him. She tries to give him every consolation that she's not upset that he brought her here. He also tries to let her know that he would fight a dog, fight through hell, fight through water, fight through anything in order to save her. And so they are able to express their love inside this tumultuous time. So I want you to pay attention to that too. I'm going to go and post this video as well as your assignment for chapter 18 on Google Classroom. You will have until April 17th to complete that assignment. And then we'll come back next week and do chapter 19 and maybe 22. Or maybe we'll do them 1 week at a time. I don't know. You guys be safe. Have a good time at home, but also do your work. All right? See you later.